All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. My name is Carlo Bobilas, and I'll be your moderator. Today's session will be presented by technical marketing engineer Eric Rennie. But before I hand over the mic, I do have a few housekeeping items to cover about today's session. Today's session will be recorded and made available on demand. We'll make sure to provide you with some details at the end. Also, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you are on WebEx and have a question for our speaker, please feel free to send it through the WebEx question and answer panel, where our wonderful panelists are ready to respond. For those tuning into our live stream, we thank you very much for joining in as well. Please use Slido to submit your questions. You can scan the QR code that's on the screen. We also have a post-event Q&A thread over on the Cisco Learning Network community where you can post any follow-up questions you might have. So without any further ado, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming Eric. Eric, over to you.
Thank you, Carlo. Yes, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending when you're watching this presentation. This session, in this next hour, we're going to cover how Cisco XDR, Extended Detection Response, and SNA, specifically 7.5.3 version, helps you transform threat detection. Now, you'll notice my picture has changed, and I'll just explain. Alexandria was supposed to be presenting the session today, but she's had a medical emergency, so I've stepped in to help out the team there. So I've left her on here because this is all her content and her material, which is great stuff. So what we're going to cover is a quick overview of SNA XDR, just in case, or for those of you who are not too familiar or need a refresher on those, we can do that. We're going to talk about the threat detection transformation, how we use SNA and XDR basically, and show how together they're better together or stronger together for incident creation, incident troubleshooting investigations, and for what we call automated workflows or playbook kind of actions that we can do with both products. So let's quickly get into the SNA and XDR overview. So there's a lot on this slide at the moment, but if we just walk through it slowly, if you look in the middle of the slide here, we've got the core components. So this is for secure network analytics, or if you hear me say SNA, it's the same thing. In the core, we have the SNA manager, we have the data store, and the flow collector. The rest of the stuff shown on this diagram is additional telemetry feeds or information that we can add to SNA. Now, just to recap, what Secure Analytics is doing, it's a networking detection response solution. And we'll see some use cases in the next slide of what we typically, or what specifically use SNA for. But effectively, it's monitoring the network. It's looking for behavioral changes, unusual behavior, anomalies. It's looking for potential threats that are crossing the network. So it's not looking at endpoints, EDR solutions, it's looking at the network. So it's kind of a different perspective. So that's why on the screen you see the flow collector, which is the main engine at the bottom here, collecting information from various sources from the network. So we can collect information from syslog, from what we call enhanced IPFix or NetFlow data. We can get information from AWS and Azure. We can download the VPC, NSG, or VNet flow logs. And using Cisco Telemetry Broker, which is a separate product from SNA, i.e. independent, it can convert those logs and send them into SNA as IPFix. We can also get Zeek logs, firewall logs, things like that. So it's just showing we can collect a lot of information, telemetry information or metadata from the network and various other network devices, even if they're cloud-based. One of the key components here as well on the intelligence side is if you look at the top of the slide, we're looking at the threat intelligence powered by Talos. Hopefully you've heard about Talos. We've got a threat feed from them. And, Talos is blocking, I've got the exact numbers now. It's like 1.5 million malware events a day, something like that, or 22 kind of a billion blocks a day that they're doing. So that threat feed or threat intelligence that we can put into the network side of things is useful. Simple example of that threat intelligence would be if we see somebody trying to communicate to a command and control server from within the network. If they breach the, should we say, zone control through the firewall, or if it's an insider attack, for example, maybe they're inside the network and they're trying to install malware and phone home, we will pick that up, obviously, with SNA. We'll see that unusual behavior, but also with that threat feed, we'll get an alert and say there's potential command and control activity happening on the network. So that's what we're giving you, that visibility of what's happening on the network. Obviously, we can use SNA to send that information using a combination of APIs, syslog message itself, webhooks, or even simple SMTP. We can send those alarms, alerts, or findings into Cisco XDR, which we're going to talk about today, or into a SIM like Splunk, depending on where you want that additional alarms to go. But the key point here is SNA is not sending the raw network telemetry into XDR or into your SIM like Splunk. It's sending the alarms alerts that we can control that volume or the fidelity of those of what we want to send in to be further investigated. Again, I said this is more of an architecture slide of what's going on in SNA. Now, this slide shows the typical use cases for secure network analytics. Obvious one is that network-wide visibility. What SA gives us is that visibility of what we call east to west traffic. So what I mean by that is traffic that's coming from maybe it's an endpoint on one access switch talking to another endpoint on the same access switch. That's your east to west kind of traffic visibility. Traditionally, most security solutions, if they're probe-based, will focus on what's called the north-south boundary. So that means where that firewall boundary is, for example, traffic coming in and out of that firewall is usually where most solutions concentrate. The ability or the beauty of secure network analytics, because it's using the network and there's network devices that provide NetFlow, IPFix, SFlow, JFlow, any kind of version of flow, depending on the vendor and the device, we can get that visibility of that east to west traffic, even if it doesn't cross a checkpoint or a security device like a firewall, for example. Other great use cases that we use or see secure analytics used for is what we call network segmentation. So we help to simplify that. And what I mean by segmentation is we kind of not control, but let's say alert to say if we see, for example, users, maybe I have a group or a part of a network called contract users or contractors. They shouldn't be accessing my group called critical or financial service, for example. They shouldn't have those privileges. But if we see that communication between one group to another group, and it should be denied by policy, then we will see that alert happening. That's what we mean by segmenting the network logically. We also have great integrations with ISE or Identity Services Engine, which we can ingest the security group tags and that segmentation information and also report on that from what ICE is enforcing for you as well as a policy engine. Obviously, other great use cases for SNA is obviously threat detection. We want to direct what is happening on that network. We use what we call behavioral modeling and a combination of machine learning, as we'll see on another slide coming up. But we're trying to detect those threats once they're behind those protected walls, or if they're from the inside, we're trying to look at that. And it's not just threats. We're looking at just behaviors, to be honest. If I see, for example, me log into a database server on a Monday morning at 9 a.m. and I've never done that before, we'll report that as unusual activity because we've never seen me do that. Now, if I do that on a regular basis, that becomes my natural behavior. The system will also learn as part of that behavioral modeling. So we're not just looking for those real out of the box like command and control type binary alerts, as I call them. We're also looking for any behavioral changes that we'll see across that network. The whole concept of SNA is obviously to reduce the mean time to repair. That makes sense. It's used a lot by some of the SOC teams for deep investigation and hunting. And this is where, when we tie it SNA with XDR, that we can see that hunting and forensic even add more value because obviously with XDR, as we'll see, we can add the network piece, the NDR piece, with the XDR. And XDR is adding endpoint information there, additional sources of intelligence and things that we can actually start to correlate events from the network, from the endpoints, and from other sources, as we'll see. So that hunting and forensic investigation gets even richer when we add XDR to the equation here. Obviously, SNA, there's no point in having a solution that can report on detection unless you can do some response or remediation with that. And that's where XDR comes in really well with us. It gives us that great remediation. We can do remediation using ICE, for example, Identity Services Engine. We can use that to enforce policies and quarantine users. But Obviously, using XDR is much better for us. We have the automatic workbooks or what we call workflows that we can actually activate and obviously do more clever things than just remediating or quarantining a host. And again, a very useful one is compliance. Some people use SNA just for like PCI compliance, for example, making sure that, like, again, certain parts of the business are not talking to other parts of the business for privacy reasons. So it's quite a useful list of use cases there. On the XDR side, the extended detection and response, if you look at this slide, it says architecture, but it's more of a logical architecture. Now, XDR, if we take each letter separately, X for the extended, that means taking in integrations or additional information from the cloud, from the network, from your firewall. So as you can see here on the slide here, you have a list of integrations there mentioned like CrowdStrike, Proofpoint. The key point here about the Cisco XDR, it's an open XDR in the fact that we're not just integrating or have integration for Cisco devices, it's also for third parties, like we showed here, like Sentinel, CrowdStrike, for example. They're looking at those endpoint information. Again, we've got the intelligence coming in. So again, this is part of what I call the X part, the extended bit. That's additional information coming from Talos, even VirusTotal, and other private sources. We also have, very similar to SNA, we have endpoint or additional telemetry coming in from the networks. As you see on the right-hand side, we have flow logs from the clouds, we have flow logs from on-prem networks, and from branches and stuff like that from Meraki and Catalyst type switches, and obviously syslog from firewall. So what the extended bit there is adding all that information from all those third-party sources, Cisco sources, private intelligence, Telus intelligence, information from the network, from the NDR portion, the SNA portion, for example. Then is the clever bit, the D bit, the detection bit, running this behavioral detection, the anomaly detection, and creating incidents, not just based on I see a single event from, for example, SNA, and I see an event from SNA, and I see something from CrowdStrike from my endpoint. Now I'll create an incident. So it's a way to control that and remediate, or actually focus your NOC or SOC analysts very quickly in how to respond. And obviously, one of the powerful bits about Cisco XDR is the R piece, the response piece, the playbooks that it has built. It has these workflows where we can activate a workflow that when we see a certain incident generated, then carry out this workflow. So it's all about rapid containment is what the secret sauce of an XDR is. Oh, in my opinion, that's what it is. So just a little bit more detail on XDR. So the XDR advantage, as this is slides laying out, it's obviously multi-vendor detection, which is what we showed you on that previous slide. When it's not just about Cisco sources of information, it's also about, like I said, CrowdStrike, Sentinel, any other vendor. We're taking that information in. The idea is to reduce that alert fatigue. We're going to add some correlation criteria, so we're not generating thousands of incidents or thousands of events for the poor SOC analysts to look at. We're going to reduce that down using correlation logic and only highlight those important events. So the idea is to make the analyst more productive in that environment, and obviously give you more enhanced return on your investment. So there's a lot on this slide. I'm not going to read through all that slide today, but you can see there, you'll obviously get a copy of these slides or be able to see these later on. But XR is allowing, like I said, those teams to detect those most sophisticated threats. It's reducing that fatigue, which is important, which a lot of our customers, a lot of our users, even me, to be honest, we get fatigued when we look at thousands of potential events or alerts and not knowing which ones are to focus on. And the beauty about XDR, it does a scoring system, so it helps you to highlight on those ones you need to address very quickly and remediate. So let's talk a little bit about the threat detection. So as you see on this slide, at the bottom of the slide, we've got security analytics. That's our data source for this particular webinar today. That's providing, if you remember what I've said, the network information, the NDR, the network detection response piece that's been feeding into XDR. We're sending the flow data in there. We send the alarms, the alerts, the findings. Also, what XDR can do is it can query back to SNA using APIs for enrichment. And what I mean by enrichment is that If in XDR you see an alert raised by, say, an endpoint detection, maybe CrowdStrike has seen something, or Cisco malware has seen something, you could then say, go show me what NDR information you have from SNA on this, what alarms and alerts to enrich that event. And we'll see how we do that in a slide coming up. So it's not all about one way. It's not all about sending the network-based focus alerts from SNA into XDR. XDR can actually go and query for enrichment to say, hey, I need to enrich this. Show me some additional information of what you've seen from the network perspective. So the idea is to take that correlation data, um, marry it up, the NDR findings with the endpoint detections and those private intelligence and all the other extended integrations, if you want to call it that, and actually make it more impactful on what we're looking at. Again, concept is similar here. We're trying to reduce that time for the SOC analysts to respond and make it quicker and easier for them to do that. And another kind of beauty about the XDR side is that the idea is that we've done all the hard work, the tuning, the setting up. So if you have a small security team that have to do multiple tasks, then XDR is really ideal for you. There's little to minimum setup there that you don't have to do all this tuning. We will do this out of the box for you. Some of the detections, this is actually the detections that Schooner Analytics is doing. It has several detection engines. So this is the engines that it's running on the left and what alarms, alerts, and actually findings it's going to send into XDR. So we start at the bottom on the slide, the core events. This is what I call the traditional behavioral detection engine that SNA is providing as part of the NDR. There's 98 what we call tunable behavioral algorithms that it's running constantly on all that network telemetry information that we're getting in. On top of that, we've got what we call an analytics, or some people call it a CA engine. Convergent analysts, you might hear that terminology, but technically it's called the analytics engine. That's an additional engine that's looking at much more clever, or not clever, that's a bad way to put it. It's doing a different modeling method there. It's using automated modeling, machine learning, and AI learning to basically model every entity device it sees on the network. So it creates roles for those devices. So another agent which is looking at the behavioral, do I normally connect to that server or not, for example, and anomalies based on that, it's looking from a different perspective. It's looking at what we call 56 alerts that are based on the on-prem data, the flow data that we're collecting. And what's the beauty about those 56 additional alerts to 98 algorithms that we're running is they're mapped to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So when you look in SNA, you can see exactly which MITRE technique and tactic that it relates to. But like I said, what I love about the analytics bit is the entity modeling that is automated. So what I mean by that is it will work out, is this a printer? Does it look like a printer? Does it talk like a printer? Ew, it must be a printer. Is this an Android device? Is this an iPhone device? Is this a DNS server, for example? That's what I mean by entity modeling. It's going to work out what those devices are, irrespective of IP address or anything like that. So that's kind of cool what that additional layer of analytics provides us. We just recently added something that we call findings or detection packs, depending on the terminology you want to use. This is another change or advancement on the NDR side of the solution. At the moment, we've added 12 new detections. Those are more signature based. Think of it more like an IDS capability. So this is all building on top of the core analytics and findings. It's not one or the other. We're adding more detections or fidelity that we can do there. So those 12 detections, for example, are looking for specific behaviors. So for example, one that I use is data exfiltration to the Mega site. Now, Mega is a site like Dropbox, which is predominantly based in New Zealand in APJC. It's often used by some bad actors to, should we say, send data they've stolen from the network. So we have a detection or a finding that looks for any traffic inside the network that goes to specific IP addresses and specific signatures to that Mega site. That will trigger a finding. And what I love about the finding is that that is actually now exported in OCF format 1.4, which is open cybersecurity schema format. What that means is when we send it into XDR or into our SIM like Splunk, because it's a standard format, those tools are find easier to read the details of that finding or that alarm and able then to act on it. Another thing we can do within SNA on top of the findings here is custom security events. This is where you, as a user, you can define your own rules effectively. You can say, if I see this host talking to this host at this time of day, they're using HTTP traffic, for example, I want to know about it. That's a policy violation, for example. That's just a simple kind of rule. That we allow you as users to define those. Another one often we forget about is SNA allows you to define relationship rules where you can define what we call host groups, that segmentation use case, where we can see certain groups talking to each other, that relationship, and if they violate that. So what I'm showing here is that SNA as the NDR engine has a lot of engines or components inside itself using that network information. It's doing all this heavy processing and then only sending, as we'll see in the next couple of slides, the important alarms or the alerts into XDR or, like we said, into a SIM potentially, depending on what you wanted to do. Okay. And this is where we show what we're sending to XDR in this particular case. Now, we have the concept of, we mentioned the behavioral security alerts. That's those 98 alerts. Those are what we call alarms. We have the new analytics alerts. So there is a difference in the terminology I'm using here. Alarms and alerts are not the same. Alerts are that new analytics engine. There's 56 of those. Behavioral, there's 98 of those. But notice on the slide, we send all those behavioral, the traditional, let's call them the traditional alarms, into XDR. But only 3 are actually processed or used to create incidents with XDR. And you'll see why in another slide. Well, I'll tell you why. Really, because 98 of those alarms are actually quite noisy, and we don't potentially want to generate lots of incidents on them. So Excel only looks at 3 specific ones there. But the analytics, that newer engine, which is less noisy, with its associated observations, all those 56 are sent from SNA to XDR and used for incident generation, which is kind of cool. And here on the slide, what we're showing on the right-hand side is just how you configure SNA to integrate with XDR. You would tell it here to enable sending of security findings to Cisco XDR. That's it. That's all the alerts. You'll also notice there's another box that says enable XDR investigation. Remember I said about the enrichment. So what we're saying is if we enable that, we allow XDR to basically enrich any incidents that it's investigating from SNA. So it's going to allow it to pull those SNA. And here we can define how many events, and we've got on the slide here, the top 10 security events, for example, over the last 15 days. So we allow XDR to pull via an API that additional enrichment information that it needs to create or it wants to create for an incident, if that makes sense. Now, looking at those behavioral security events, we just said on the previous slide, there's only 3 of those events that we show below that are that are ingested or processed by XDR to create an incident. Now, XDR will show you the findings. The findings will show you all the findings, but to generate an incident, it adds this correlation criteria. And it will only do it on certain alarms. And the idea, if you remember on the slides, is to advert or to avoid alert fatigue. Remember, we don't want to have thousands of alarms and alerts, and then the SOC analyst there gets fatigued or even fed up and starts to ignore the solution. So there's a reason why we do this. So we don't hide or we don't lose any of those events. Just for the incidents, we apply correlation logic. Now, there's a lot on this slide here to show you the correlation criteria, what it does for these particular events. But if we look at an incident, so an incident is created when an IP address from SNA security event, so that's off these 3 particular alarms, matches any correlation observable. So that means it's an IP, device, hostname, username, file process, hash, or URL. So it's looking for those as its criteria, or what it calls observable. But it has to be from a different source within a 1-day rolling window. So what it's saying there is it's got to see for these particular alarms, at least. So what I'm trying to say is, if I have suspect data loss generated, it's going to see that. It's not going to generate an incident unless I see something else complaining about data loss. For example, my endpoint, my EDR. I need another source before XDR will go, you know what? Now I'm going to create an incident because I see SNA, the NDR is giving me a suspect data loss alarm, and the endpoint is complaining about data loss as well. It's going to correlate that. Obviously, they both have the same IP address, it's the same endpoint. That's what I'm saying about the observable, but also that we see it within a certain time frame. So it's two events from two different sources for that one particular host, if that makes sense. So that's what we're trying to say here. And also at the bottom here, the data handling, I mentioned there that if in a 7-day time window, if you do have the two source correlation is not met, i.e. you see suspect data loss, but you don't see a corresponding event from the endpoint, then it's not going to generate the incident, like I said. So don't go looking for it. It's not going to be there. But those security events are still stored for data enrichment and for threat investigations under findings within XDR, within the data lake itself. So the long and short of it is, for the traditional behavior, we require another source to create the incident. Now, I highlight this a lot because it confused me when I first looked at it and I was trying to find NDR events in XDR and things like that. So it's kind of key, that correlation logic. Now, remember we said analytics is different. That's the newer engine. That's the conversion analytics engine, or some people call it, but the analytics. It's looking at alerts like new remote access, LDAP connection spikes, suspicious kill behavior, things like that. It's basing those alerts on, again, the network from SNA, the NetFlow data, the IPFix data, the network visibility module information that we can get from endpoint, and even now Zeek log. And you'll see this little screenshot here showing you just a snippet of those alarms. There's 56 of those, like I said, today. And you can see there, it shows you what telemetry information you need, what MITRE techniques and tactics that it triggers. But if you look at the alert criteria, it's different from what I just explained about those only three traditional alarms that sent. In XDR, the incident creation is that if we see two or more SNA analytics alerts from the same source. So if the same host, same IP generates two different alerts, then you'll get incident created. If obviously there is a look back period. If the alerts are detected within 1 day, if it's correlated by device or IP address, or it will look back 7 days if it's URL or hash. So there's different criteria here. Again, it sounds very complicated. The idea of this is to reduce the fatigue again, and not constantly generate lots of alerts. But the key point here with analytics is no additional detection sources are required, unlike the previous one. Remember, we need two different sources. We need something from the endpoint, something from the network. Here, we don't. We can have it all come from NDR, from SNA. It will generate that long as we see two or more alerts generated for it. It will create an incident. Again, key concept in XDR and how it views the network information. Now, here's a little example, and it's not a live demo, but there is a demo for people that might be interested in this. We have what we call a WebEx vidcast, and I need to check to see if we can share that publicly at the moment. But this is based on something that my team member, Stella Wilson, and my team has set up. And what she's showing you here, and I said, hopefully we can share the actual live demo that she's created externally, is she has a workstation 2 on the left. Now that workstation is sending MVM flow, network visibility module flow, into secure network analytics. It's also sending endpoint telemetry into secure endpoint. Remember I said for behavioral detections, we need two different sources, one from the endpoint, one from the network. So the network is the SNA in the bottom of the screen. The endpoint is the secure endpoint solution that we're getting. So we're getting two sources that are sending into XDR. Now, the event that she's created in this demo is something called suspicious process path alert. So that's an alert that's been generated by SNA. And that suspicious path is just saying that there's a file there or a process that is executed on endpoint from a directory that should not have any executables. So that's what suspicious process path alert means from an SA's perspective. So I'll just say that again. So as a process being executed in a directory that should have no executables. So somebody's put an executable, we're alerting to that. We're sending that alert. SNA is generating that alert. It's part of those conversion alerts. It gets sent automatically into XDR. Now, remember, XDR is not going to process that alert unless it sees two separate alerts from SNA or an alert from SNA and an alert from a different source. The different source this time, in this example, the secure endpoint. So Cisco secure endpoint is also detecting a suspicious behavior here. It's using the kill binary executed that it's detected. Obviously, endpoint can see deeper into the endpoint and gives us more detail of exactly what that suspicious process or file is. So what she's doing is demo is showing we've got two sources. We generate an incident, it's prioritize that incident. Part of that incident is then the automated response. She then applies a workflow using orchestration there. And that's that second dotted line go back to containment. So that containment is carrying out an action to quarantine that workstation 2, the WKST2 there. So we're using XDR to do that automatically for us. And it's going to log all the actions it does. So when it sees that suspicious path alert from SNA, it sees that endpoint obfuscated kill binary executed behavior. It's going to generate an incident. Because we set it up to enact a specific workflow, it's going to do the quarantine workflow and automatically quarantine that remote endpoint until we can investigate it further. So showing you how we can use the power of XDR and SNA together to do quickly remediate any potential threats using the network information and endpoint information together, which is the power of XDR, if you remember, using all those extended sources, wherever they come from, endpoint, cloud, firewalls, network, for example, using them together is the power here, the secret. Just wrapping up here, um, just summarizing some of the new key features in Secure Analytics 7.5.3. If you haven't already seen this slide before or have not seen 7.5.3, in the recent release, this came out recently, we've added those new OCF findings. So this is part of what I mentioned about the new detection packs. So we introduced the concept of the new detection packs, but they're also exported in what we call the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework, which is a standard. We use version 1.4 at the moment if you're interested in the details on that. It helps us better align, like I said, our detections with XDR and with systems like Splunk and other vendors. Because it's a standard format, it's easier to read those, well, not easier, but it's easier to map the information into incidents and detections that we need. Also, in this version of SNA, if you're interested, SNA is licensed by flows per second, which is a flow rate metering. Because SNA now not only ingests NetFlow, network visibility module flow data, what we call SAL or firewall log, and Zeek log information, we standardize the licensing or the metering all to flows per second. So that's all that means. If you've not used SNA before, it probably doesn't mean much to you. But if you used it in the past, this does help a lot because you don't have to buy or work out different licenses for your firewall, for your Zeek, or for your flow data, for example. It's just one. And obviously, to make it easier to report on, we created a new report in SNA, which actually shows you that flow rate license or the usage, and it breaks it down to the different telemetry inputs so you can actually measure that and record that and monitor how much you're using or not using potentially. Also, in SNA 7.5.3, we added additional Zeek log storage and capability. So that's quite good. In the previous version, we only had Zeek alerts that were going or being generated. Now we have the ability for you to look at 43 different Zeek logs is what we're ingesting at the moment. And we're storing those Zeek logs either on the data store appliance, which we covered in the architecture slide at the beginning of the session, or we're storing those on what we call the flow collector, depending on the type of log it is. But the concept is that we now give you the ability to look at those historical logs over a longer period of time. And you can actually use those Zeek logs for deep investigation. What I mean by that is you can look at what we call the parent Zeek log. You can use the unique user ID from that log. You can pivot it into, for example, show me everything that unique person did as a DNS request or HTTP request. So there's a lot of deeper threat investigation hunting you can do with the addition of those Zeek log coming in. On the simplification side of things, I mentioned, I mentioned ICE, Identity Services Engine, but we added what we call host group automation, which basically helps us take information from the identity services engine, the security group tags and things like that, and create host groups based on the security group tags, which are used for segmentation in ICE to segment parts of the network. We can take that information and create what we call host groups, and we can also apply different policies with SNA based on those host groups if we want to. So there's no need to regenerate those groups. We just pull those in via a combination of APIs and PX Grid, and we can build those for you on that. We're trying to improve that host group automation in the next version by adding different sources of IPAMs or IP address management systems, so it makes it easier to run SNA and create those groups for you. We're doing a lot of adoption of what's called magnetic framework, which is basically the user interface. We're making all our products, whether it's XDR, SNA, endpoint, firewalls, you'll notice the way you navigate around those user interfaces is becoming kind of standard how you do that. That's what we mean by magnetic framework. So it's more of a visual thing. We've also created in SNA 7.5.3 a new, what we call associated flows API. That's for a really very specific use case. And it's basically sometimes when you look at a alarm in SNA, and if it has multiple destinations or targets or sources for that, what you'll normally see in SNA, it will just give you a 000 IP address because it says, I can't give you one IP address because there's multiple IP addresses. What this new API allows you to do in this particular case is when you see that alarm, you can use the associated flows API for it then to go back and cross reference the alarm with other sources. So it'll give you a breakdown of those multiple IP addresses effectively. So it really helps on, again, threat hunting and troubleshooting. On the operational enhancements on the right there, a lot of those are for our basically our support teams, our tech teams on how to use a product and things like that. We've also doing continuing, obviously, Fed certifications of the data store appliance and SNA itself in general. Obviously, we have a lot of federal government customers that's very important there. And you can just see on the slider, it's jumped off the screen a little bit there. We made some improvements on how we do syslog and LDAP authentication on that. So that's kind of the major improvements that we've seen in the latest version of SNA 7.5.3. You'll have SNA 7.6.0 that'll be coming out right about February, March time. So just after Christmas, you'll see some other greater enhancements on that. So we're continuing to develop SNA as we talk. So just summarizing on the slide here that Alexander has left me here. The key points to remember after this session with SNA 7.5.3 and XDR is it's stronger together, better together. So why the integration matters. Think about the modern threats, they move fast and hide well. We need the ability to detect those. Often, like I said, all these tools, like you have SNA will work in a silo. It does the NDR portion. You have the endpoint that works in a silo. That only looks at endpoint. We have too many tools. Why don't we integrate them? Let's use XDR as the integration layer that can look at endpoint. It can look at the network, the NDR point. It can look at threat intelligence, private intelligence, whatever you want to connect it. Let it be the orchestration layer for our analysts. That's the key concept here of the session in XDR. Obviously, SNA delivers, as we briefly mentioned in the session, that behavioral analytics. It's looking at that network. It's got lots of detection engines, as you saw, not just behavioral. It's got the networks, it's got the findings and things like that. But the idea is looking for that lateral movement, that visibility in the model there. In the network, the concept there. And obviously providing that entity modeling and additional rich context. So let SNA do the heavy work for the network portion, that NDR, the network detection response. Let it do that piece and forward those important alarms, alerts, or findings into XDR or into a SIM. XDR, we said, helps with that cross-domain correlation. Remember, look at endpoint, cloud, email, network. bringing that into one place, using those correlation rules. Yes, the correlation rules sound complicated, but they're there for a reason, to unify the incident and not to overwhelm or fatigue us, if you remember. And then also giving that ability to audit those incidents. You can write audit logs. You can write, now with agentic AI, you can get XDR to give you summaries of that. So you can quickly create summary reports for management or executive briefings. You can do the automated investigations, as we said, where you're able to quarantine that host or whatever actions you want to do out of the box there. There's out of the box investigations. You can even create your own if you want to. But the idea is that, it's provide that consistency and orchestrating all those particular incidents we have in the network. Okay. And then the last couple of slides we've got here, it's just helping you. These are backup slides here, helping you how you can get more on your journey, for use cases, the onboarding. There's also, you can learn more about our services from the services team, the CX team here, how they can help with advisory, implementation, optimization, and great stuff like that along the way. And here's a slide we've left in here. Obviously, this is for reference. You can open a attack case if you don't know how to do it already, how you need to log in to look at your service contract agreement and things like that. Okay. And I think I'll just end up on here. So, yep, there's a lot of useful links here that Alexandra's left in the deck for you guys to look at. You got the XDR Help Center. That's really helpful. It has a lot of information there. It's an online, basically, user guide if you want to look at that. If you want to get into more about automation, there's the automation lab there. If you want to look at how XDR can do that, how you can build your own automation workflow, they're all pretty good workshops there. You've got the SNA pages as well, SNA Training Center. And there's a lot of free training on SNA. If you've got a Cisco ID, CCO ID, you log into the SNA training site. You can look at Cisco Telemetry Broker trainings there, SNA training. You can look at use cases, more depth. All the training is free if you got a CCID. The only time they charge you for the SNA training if you are on a bespoke training course. So that's the only time you would potentially have to pay for that. Look at the what you call premium enhanced support information. There's detailed descriptions if you're interested in that. But some great links there on the session. Okay, so yeah, I'm sure Carlo's going to repeat this in a minute, but if you would please do the survey invite and for the customer experience closes here and take 2 minutes. We would obviously value your input and your feedback to make these sessions a lot more helpful and useful for you guys. So that's me. I'll wrap up the session now a little bit early and we'll see if we've got any questions, I think, Carlo.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you very much, Eric. Great presentation. A lot of information out there. You mentioned the links. I'll go ahead and post the link to where the post-event discussion thread will be. We'll make sure to upload a copy of the slide deck in the chat, so I'll put that now. And if you are joining us via the live stream, you can join that discussion thread. If you within Slido on the top left corner, there's a drop-down menu where you can pull up where the post-event discussion thread will be. All right. So again, if you have a question, feel free to go ahead and post it into the WebEx question and answer panel and or on Slido. So while we wait for questions, I'm also going to just post a couple links here. So give me 1 sec. Let's take a look. It doesn't look like there's any additional questions, but let me get that survey open on Slido. So if you are on Slido, open that survey now. And then for those of you that are on WebEx, once you exit the session and once the session ends, you'll be directed to that post-event survey. Okay. All right, Eric. I think you've gave them all the information because I don't see any questions coming in. So is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Nothing from me.
Thank you very
Carlo,
much.
will
Oh,
the
yes.
if we determine that the vidcast is something customer facing, will it be included on the follow up? Where people go to look at prior
Yeah, no,
webinars.
definitely. So
Okay.
yes, we can. And
Okay.
what we'll do is I'll see if I can work with the team to go ahead and see if we can get that converted to a standalone video and we can still
Okay.
upload that onto the post-event
Yeah.
discussion thread. So
That'd be
definitely
great.
do bookmark that. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Just wanted people to look for that because it's it's one thing to understand it conceptually and then to be able to see the work that Stella did to put together a demo of it.
Love it. Love it.
Okay,
All right.
thanks.
Thank you very much, Beth. All right. So, again, if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and join us on the post-event discussion thread. Or if you have a couple more minutes, I'll go ahead and leave the Q&A window open for a couple more minutes. Recordings will be linked to on that post-event discussion thread, so definitely do bookmark that. Once again, we thank everyone for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Have a great day.